Ever get that feeling, where something just seems a little off? And you think to yourself, that's weird. Well, today we're going to unlock the secrets to really understanding those weird moments, those head scratchers.
Absolutely.
We're talking about getting to that next level, that ability to not just notice a problem, but to really understand the why.
Yeah, the why.
And this isn't just for the hardcore analysts out there. This is about equipping you, the listener, with tools to understand anything better. It could be a tricky question in a job interview.
Right.
Or maybe figuring out why your team just suddenly seems less productive. Or even just grasping those big shifts, in how people are using technology, how the world's changed, whatever clicks for you.
Totally. And the cool thing is, we've got some really fascinating search material today that dives deep into this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So think about it like this. Imagine you see that fewer people are watching Netflix these days, or maybe Paytm, that digital payment platform. Suddenly their transactions have dropped. Root cause analysis, RCA, it's the toolkit, it's the mindset that helps you go beyond just the surface.
So not just those immediate symptoms, you're saying?
Exactly. Instead of just seeing those symptoms, you actually uncover the root causes, the real reasons driving those changes.
I like it. So we're being detectives today.
We are.
We're putting on our detective hats, looking for clues. Now, the material we're using, it's really focused on job interviews and how interviewers use RCA to, test your problem-solving skills.
Right.
But, and this is important for everyone listening, the ideas, the principles here, they're so much broader.
They really are.
If you've ever wondered about the why behind anything, seriously, this deep dive is for you. We're going to break it all down. What is RCA really? Why is it so valuable? And most importantly, how do you actually do it? How do you think like a true problem solver?
Couldn't have said it better myself. By the end of this, you'll have a much sharper understanding of how to approach those tough problems, not just how to, put out a fire, but to stop the fire from starting in the first place.
That's the dream, right? Stop the fire entirely.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's dive into this. First things first, why do interviewers even care about this root cause analysis stuff? It seems, I don't know, kind of specific, maybe.
Well, think about it from their perspective. When an interviewer throws an RCA-type question at you, they're simulating a real problem, a real-world scenario. They're not just testing your knowledge. They want to see your process. How do you deal with the unknown? How do you organize your thoughts? And can you, at the end of the day, move towards a real solution?
So it's more about how you think, not just what you know.
Exactly. It's the thought process that's key. Are you methodical? Do you explore different angles? Can you apply logic and figure out what information you need to really get to the bottom of the issue?
It makes sense. They're trying to see if you'd be a good fit for their team, how you'd tackle challenges. So it's like a test drive for your brain. And our sources, they highlight 4 key abilities that interviewers and, honestly, anyone trying to solve a problem are looking for. Let's break them down, starting with product sense.
Okay, product sense.
What does that even mean?
Well, it's all about having that deep understanding of whatever product or service you're looking at. You need to grasp the big picture, what's its purpose, who's it for, but also be able to zoom in on the details. How does it actually work, step by step?
So it's like having different levels of magnification, right?
Yeah. You start with that 50,000-foot view, then you zoom into street level, then even closer to examine the fine print.
I get it. So without that understanding, you're kind of lost from the get-go.
Yeah, totally. You can't really analyze a problem with Netflix, for example, if you don't even understand how their business works, what kind of content they offer, what their user experience is like.
Makes total sense. It's like trying to fix a car engine without knowing anything about cars. You wouldn't even know where to start. All right, skill number 2, problem solving. This feels like the heart of RCA, right?
Oh, absolutely. This is where the detective work really kicks in.
Time to put on our magnifying glasses.
It's not enough to just notice the problem, like, oh, fewer people are using this app. You got to dig deeper. Why is that happening? What's the real driving force behind it?
Love it. Clue number 1. Okay, what about structural thinking and communication? This sounds like it's about being organized and then, actually explaining yourself well.
You got it. You could have the most brilliant ideas in the world, but if you can't present them in a clear, structured way, they lose their impact. Our material emphasizes this. Even before you start brainstorming causes, you have to make sure the problem is real and you have to define it properly.
So not jumping to conclusions, basically.
Exactly. Is it actually true that Netflix subscriptions are declining? By how much? Over what time period? Getting that clear structure and communication, that's crucial whether you're in a job interview or just working on a project with your team.
So it's about taking a step back, making sure everyone's on the same page. Okay, last but not least, the fourth key skill is domain knowledge and background.
Right, domain knowledge.
This one seems pretty self-explanatory. You need to know what you're talking about, right?
It's like having the right tools for the job. If you're trying to figure out why people aren't using a social media app as much, well, it helps to understand how social media works in the first place. What kind of content is popular? What are the trends in user behavior? That background knowledge gives you a huge advantage.
It's like a specialist coming in to investigate a very specific crime scene. Okay, let's put all this into practice. Imagine you're in that job interview, and the interviewer says, Paytm transactions have dropped by 50%. What's the first thing you do?
First things first. Repeat the question back to the interviewer. Make absolutely sure you understand what they're asking.
Don't want to go off in the wrong direction.
Exactly. It seems simple, but it can save you from a lot of wasted time and effort.
Yeah.
Once you're clear on the problem, the next step is to break it down. Take that big, complex issue and divide it into smaller, more manageable pieces.
Kind of like a puzzle, right? Looking at all the individual pieces before you try to put the whole thing together.
Perfect analogy. So instead of just Paytm transactions are down, you start digging deeper. What exactly do we mean by transactions? What kind of transactions are we talking about?
What counts as a transaction in this case?
Right. And what does decreased really mean? Are we talking about the total number of transactions? The average amount of each transaction? The number of people using Paytm? You got to be specific.
Fit those details.
Exactly. And then think about the context of that drop. Was it sudden, like a cliff? Or was it more gradual, a slow decline? Does this happen every year at a certain time? Has it happened before? All these things paint a clearer picture.
It's like those detective shows where they're piecing together the timeline. Where were you on the night of? Okay, so you've clarified the problem, you've got the details. Now what?
Now we start exploring potential causes. And a helpful way to think about this is to divide them into external factors, things outside of Paytm's control, and internal factors, things going on within Paytm itself.
Okay, so starting with the outside world, what kind of external factors could be at play here?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things to consider. Think about the economy. Is there a recession? Are people just spending less money overall?
That would definitely affect things.
Right. Then there's the government. Did they introduce any new regulations that might make it harder to use digital payment platforms?
Ah, yeah, red tape.
Exactly. What about Paytm's competitors? Are other companies offering better deals, running aggressive ad campaigns, stealing away customers?
The business world's a jungle out there, so competition's a big one.
Definitely. And don't forget about the social and political landscape. Has there been a scandal or controversy involving Paytm? Are people losing trust in them?
Reputations are fragile.
They are. And then, of course, there's the big, unpredictable events like, I don't know, a global pandemic, for example.
Yeah, that'll shake things up.
Things like that can have a huge impact on how people use technology and services like Paytm. It's important to think about all those external forces that could be contributing to the problem.
So it's like looking at the bigger picture, the whole context.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've scoured the outside world. Now let's turn our attention inward. What kind of internal factors, issues within Paytm itself could be causing this 50% drop?
Okay, so now we're putting on our Paytm employee hats, trying to see things from their perspective.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah, behind the scenes. The first thing to look at is the user experience. Has Paytm made any changes to their app or website that make it harder or more confusing to use?
Oh yeah, like a bad redesign. That could definitely drive people away.
For sure. Or maybe they changed their terms of service in a way that people don't like. Or maybe there are just technical glitches, bugs in the system. Is the app crashing? Are payments failing? Those kind of things can be super frustrating for users.
I know. I get annoyed when apps don't work right.
Everyone does. And then there's pricing. Did Paytm recently increase their fees? Did they start charging for something that used to be free? Those kinds of changes can definitely lead to a drop in transactions.
Okay, so we've got our list of suspects, both external and internal. What's the next step?
Now it's time to take a breather. Don't rush into solutions just yet.
Pause for a moment.
Yeah, take a few seconds, maybe even just 30 seconds, to really organize your thoughts. Think about all the potential causes you've identified. Maybe jot them down, create a little mental map. And then, crucially, before you start suggesting solutions, explain your plan to the interviewer.
So here's how I'm thinking about approaching this.
Exactly. It shows them that you have a structured approach, that you're not just throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Makes sense. Okay, so now we're ready to dig a little deeper with some more targeted questions.
And our source calls these scoping questions, although it suggests using the term preliminary instead.
Okay, preliminary questions. What's the purpose of those?
They're designed to gather that crucial contextual information that helps you narrow down the possibilities even further.
Like getting a sharper focus on the problem.
Exactly. So you might ask about the geographic scope of the problem. Is this drop in transactions happening everywhere, or is it just in certain regions?
Okay, so location matters.
It does. And then there's the timeline. When did this drop start? Has it been consistent, or are there any patterns? And which part of Paytm's business is being hit the hardest? Is it peer-to-peer payments, merchant payments, bill payments?
So figuring out where the pain points are?
Precisely. And of course, you want to get a sense of the real-world impact. How much money are they losing because of this drop? How many users have stopped using the platform?
Okay, so quantifying the problem. And then finally, you really want to drill down on that specific metric that's changed.
Yes, that's crucial. Understanding not just that transactions are down, but how they're down. Is it the number of transactions, the average amount per transaction, or maybe the frequency of transactions per user? That tells you a lot about the nature of the problem.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together, how each question builds on the last one.
That's exactly the point of this structured approach. And don't forget, take good notes. The answers to these preliminary questions can be super valuable later on, helping you connect the dots.
Like breadcrumbs leading to the culprit.
You got it.
Okay, so we've done our preliminary investigation. Now it's time to get even more specific with some demographic questions. What's the point of focusing on who's using Paytm?
This is where we start looking at the users themselves. Are there any patterns in terms of who's being affected by this drop in transactions? Are younger users abandoning the platform? Or is it older users, men or women, people in certain locations or income brackets? Understanding the demographics can reveal a lot about the underlying causes.
It's like profiling, right? Trying to understand the victim in a crime.
Exactly. For example, if you find that the drop is mainly among young people in urban areas, that might point to a different set of problems than if it's mostly older people in rural areas.
Makes sense. Different groups of people have different needs and habits.
Precisely. So by analyzing the demographics, you can get a much clearer picture of who's being affected and why.
All right, we've laid the groundwork. We understand the problem. We've got some context. We've profiled our victims. Now it's time to really roll up our sleeves and dig into those potential external and internal issues we identified earlier.
Yeah, the real investigation begins. Remember all those external factors we talked about? Now's the time to ask specific questions about them.
Like, did the government actually change any regulations recently?
Exactly. Or what are Paytm's competitors up to? Have they introduced any new features or launched any big marketing campaigns?
Are people trash-talking Paytm on social media?
Yeah, all those things. You want to see if any of those external factors can explain the drop in transactions. And here's a key point. If you go down that external path and you're not finding the answers, it's time to switch gears.
Time to look inside.
Exactly. Switch over to those internal factors and have your questions ready so you don't get stuck fumbling.
All right, so let's talk internal factors. What kind of questions should we be asking Paytm about themselves?
Well, first off, you want to look for any differences in performance or user experience across different platforms. Is the Android app performing worse than the iOS app? Or is the website slower than the mobile app?
Okay, so comparing apples to apples, or rather Androids to iPhones.
Exactly. And then think about any recent updates or changes. Did Paytm roll out any major new features recently? Did they fix any big bugs? Sometimes, even seemingly positive changes can have unintended consequences.
It's like that saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Huh, right. And don't forget to look at user feedback. What are people saying in App Store reviews? Are they complaining about anything specific? Are there any trends in customer support tickets? That direct feedback can be super valuable. And at this point, as you're gathering all this information, make sure you're connecting the dots. Look for patterns, see if anything stands out.
Like, aha, maybe this is the smoking gun.
That is the spirit.
Now, our source also emphasizes the importance of understanding the affected metric. Why is it so crucial to focus on that specific number that's changed?
Because it can tell you a lot about the underlying problem. It's not enough to just know that transactions are down. You need to understand how they're down.
So the nuance of the decline.
Exactly. For example, is it the number of transactions that's down, meaning fewer people are using Paytm? Or is it the average amount per transaction that's down, meaning people are still using Paytm, but they're spending less each time? Or maybe it's the frequency of transactions that's down, meaning people are using Paytm less often. Each of those scenarios points to a different set of potential causes.
So it's about getting granular, really understanding the specifics of the drop. It's like saying the patient's temperature is high versus saying the patient has a fever of 103 degrees.
Perfect analogy. The more precise you are, the better equipped you are to diagnose the problem.
Okay, we're getting close to cracking this case. Our source mentions one final tool to consider, and they call it a user journey analysis. What is that all about?
Think of this as the final stage, when you've explored all the other avenues and you're still not quite sure what's going on.
Okay, the last resort.
It's not so much a last resort, but more like a very specific, focused approach. It's all about really understanding how users interact with Paytm, step by step. What do they do when they first open the app? How do they navigate through the different menus and options? What are the steps involved in making a payment? By mapping out that entire user journey, you can start to see where things might be going wrong.
So you're literally walking in the user's shoes.
Exactly. And then you might choose to focus on a particular part of that journey where you suspect the problem is occurring. And the questions you ask at this stage, they're going to be very specific to Paytm and how their app works. But the goal is to see if there's any point where users are getting frustrated, confused, or just giving up altogether.
Okay, so it's like a micro-investigation within the larger investigation. Very cool. We've covered a lot of ground today. Any final thoughts or key takeaways for our listeners?
You know, it's important to remember that root cause analysis is a process, and it's not always linear.
It's not a straight line.
No, there might be twists and turns, dead ends. You might have to go back and re-examine things.
Like a good detective story.
Exactly. And it's okay if you don't find a single definitive answer. Sometimes there are multiple factors contributing to a problem. The important thing is to be methodical, to be curious, and to keep asking questions.
So be confident, be structured,
Yeah.
and don't be afraid to think out loud. That's great advice. So to recap, we've learned that root cause analysis is a powerful tool for getting to the bottom of things. It's about understanding the why behind problems, not just the what. And while we've talked about it in the context of job interviews, these principles are applicable to so many areas of life.
They really are. Whether you're trying to improve your own productivity, solve a problem at work, or just understand the world around you better, RCA can help.
So, on that note, here's a challenge for all of you listening. Think about a problem you've encountered recently. Maybe you had a frustrating experience with a website, or you felt a dip in your own motivation. Whatever it is, try applying these RCA steps we've discussed today. Really dig into the why and see what insights you can uncover, because often understanding the root cause of a problem gives you the power to truly solve it, rather than just treating the symptoms.
And who knows? Maybe you'll discover something surprising about yourself or the world around you.
Food for thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into root cause analysis.
My pleasure.
Until next time.